Hello and welcome to Module 7. We'll be discussing imagery in this module. We want to know how to optimize your mental game with visualization. All right, so the learning objectives for this module are to identify uses of imagery, describe how to maximize visualization, identify theories on why imagery works, and practice developing an imagery script. Now, you'll see that we interchange imagery and visualization together. They're essentially one and the same, so just keep that in mind as you listen and watch this video. All right, let's keep on keeping on. All right, so there's lots of uses for imagery. Here in sports, we primarily want to use it to improve our concentration, enhance our motivation, build confidence, control our emotions. Oftentimes we feel as though in a sporting event and or in events that we come across in performance, whether it be in work or school, we tend to have similar emotions and we feel like, well, this is just kind of how I feel at this time. You can actually use imagery to regulate those emotions. Also, it helps us prepare for competition, acquire and correct sports skills, and cope with pain and injury. Athletes can use imagery in many ways to improve both physical and psychological skills. We're going to use these skills later on in the class and in our activities. All right, moving on into how to maximize imagery. Now, there are three key components to maximizing imagery. The first one is perspective, the second, vividness, and the third, controllability. Now, let's take each one of those independently. All right, so perspective, as you'll see, is divided into two aspects. One would be the first person aspect, which is going to be your internal way of looking at things, as though you're seeing things through your own eyes. The second one would be third person, or the external perspective. So those are two primary perspectives, and there's no indication on one working better than the other. It's important to understand that the person doing the imagery will have a preference, whether they prefer to use first person or third person. Research does indicate, though, that someone who's narcissistic tends to lean more toward the third person or external view, because as you can imagine, if you're more narcissistic, somebody that likes to watch themselves, and maybe they're the kind of person that passes every mirror and has to look at themselves and coif their hair and do that kind of thing, that person tends to like to see themselves in action. So, but both can be very effective. And if you have any issues with trying to switch in between these, that's totally normal early on in developing imagery. But again, perspective is going to be a key component of maximizing imagery. So working on how to see things through your own eyes or through the eyes of like a spectator. Okay, vividness essentially encompasses all our senses. Okay, so we're talking about sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, those kind of senses. When we do imagery, the more that we can incorporate more senses and the intensity of those senses, the better the imagery will impact our behavior and performance. So as we will learn here in a little bit about the theories behind this, it's the vividness often that helps us develop brain patterns that will help us manage our arousal during performance better than if we don't use imagery. Okay, so again, we want to use all the senses to create an image: physical, emotional, and cognitive. It's important that you pay attention to details. Think about a time when you're listening to a song and it elicits an image, or it elicits a thought. Same with smells or songs or things like that that tend to bring up an image in your head or an emotion in your thoughts that you almost every time you do this, you smell it, see it, touch it, that it elicits this sound. And as you're continue to progress in sports, if you think back to when you were in sports, think about when you would put on your glove if you're a baseball player, or you bounce the ball or feel the leather of a basketball, or if you're volleyball, the smells of the gym. If you're in track and field, the sights, the sounds, the feel of the wind on your face, all those things play a key component in us developing a vividness for our imagery. Okay, and last, to help us maximize our imagery and the benefits to get from it, is to learn how to control objects. And that component is called controllability. This is where you want to imagine what you want to accomplish. You don't want to really be imagining mistakes in this, because we want to build the patterns in our brain and in our muscles and in our body to complete the task successfully. So again, we want to work on manipulating the object in real time and with no mistakes. You want to see it how you would imagine it to perfectly happen. Obviously, there is definitely use for imagery in correcting mistakes, and so that's a whole different topic. But in general, we want to do, when we incorporate controllability in our image, we want to make sure that we are making no mistakes and doing the performance perfectly or the movement perfectly. All right, so let's jump into a few theories behind the effectiveness of imagery. All right, so there's more theories than what we're going to present here on these slides, but essentially the psychoneuromuscular, symbolic learning, and psychological, and actually the psychological is also known as the attention arousal set theory. And so with that, we will take a look at these theories and how they impact our performance, right? So the psychoneuromuscular theory essentially indicates that when we do vivid imagery, that our muscles are innervated by nerves similarly to when we physically perform the task. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to take place of physical practice. However, it does indicate that we can use this as a complement to physical practice to help us develop the correct movement patterns, right? And the research out there indicates that when we use the vivid imagery, that we will be able to more quickly and effectively accomplish the movement patterns that we are looking to use, or looking to perform, I should say. Okay, the next theory that we're going to touch on here is symbolic learning. Now, symbolic learning, the research suggests that imagery may function as a coding system that helps us understand and acquire movement patterns. When we create these mental blueprints in our brain, it helps us to then repeat that movement over and over again successfully. Again, why we want to imagine ourselves controlling objects and moving perfectly is because we want to create those blueprints with the perfect muscle pattern. Oftentimes, we have issues with, our bodies aren't moving the way we intend them to, or we don't have the correct movement patterns to complete the movement successfully or perform at our best. And we want to make sure that we have replications of the, not evidence, but examples of, say, a video example of the correct movement pattern. So that way, when we imagine ourselves moving through space and moving through the movement of your activity, that we have the perfect coded pattern that we want to use, right? So, and research indicates that, this is best use for cognitive aspect of sports. So, instead of, when we think about learning, we think about learning in 3 stages. You start off in a cognitive stage where you have to think a lot, right? And during this cognitive stage of learning, it comes in really handy to be able to image yourselves to see the correct movement patterns, because then you, again, like mentioned, you will code the correct movement patterns for your body. Okay, the last one is the psychological explanations behind imagery being effective, and that is the attention arousal set theory. Now, essentially, what this research focuses in on is how does imagery allow us to prepare ourselves and optimize our arousal? Because obviously before an event, whether it be an interview, a sporting event, or even an exam, we tend to have the pregame jitters, right? And so when we have those pregame jitters, if we have prepared ourselves with a mental script of what that event is to be like, and we repeat that script over and over again, then we have the ability to set our arousal at its optimal level so that we have the ability to perform our best, right? Because when we go into an event and we have the correct arousal, it gives us confidence, it increases our concentration, and it's going to decrease that anxiety, all things that will improve our performance. Okay, so these theories, the way to maximize imagery, all great. We want to look at the factors affecting the imagery effectiveness. And again, it comes down to the nature of the task. Is it a very complex task that requires a lot of details, or is it pretty, simple task and one that doesn't have a lot of details? That will obviously affect your imagery effectiveness and or the time it takes to create and develop effective imagery scripts. So again, the nature of the task is important. Is it complex or simple? The skill level of the learner, both in skill level in mental skills, skill level in physical skills, skill level in actual imagery. If you haven't practiced imagery very much, then obviously your skill level is going to be quite a bit lower. And as you use imagery over and over again and practice it, you're going to get better. So again, that's all part of it. And then lastly, your personality. As mentioned before, personality of being a narcissist can affect the type of perspective you want to use, but also your personality will impact your own image of yourself, right? Do you have perceived ability, perceived controllability? Do you feel as though you are confident in your skills that you're trying to do? So all those factors play a part in the effectiveness of imagery. And these are just a few of the factors that I wanted to touch on. There are others, obviously, because imagery is super complex, but these are the primary ones that we can all have control over and think about when we're creating our script. Okay, now we're going to talk about developing an imagery script. And a couple questions you need to ask yourselves are the simple questions of why, who, what, where, and when, right? Why? Why even set an imagery goal? Why do that? Well, when you set goals, and if you set an imagery goal of practicing imagery once a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week, whatever it might be, and you begin to do that over and over, you're doing a couple things. One, you're building up the skill set of imagery, but 2, you're also accomplishing a goal. Every time you accomplish a goal, you develop more confidence that you can learn something new, and therefore it's going to help you develop. So why set an imagery goal? Helps build confidence. Who, the question when you ask the question who, consider imaging ability of yourself and or the individual who's going to be doing the imagery. What is the content of the image that you want to create? Again, going back to vividness. What's the environment like? So, again, when we create an imagery script, we want to create it as close to the actual environment that we are going to be in as possible. And oftentimes we even want to image while in that environment, right? We want to do our imagery there. And then when do you want to use imagery? Well, you're going to decide, are you using this particular script before, during, or after the event? So again, imagery can be set up to be developed, and your script can be developed for either of and all of those ones. Obviously, in-performance imagery scripts will be more quick than the pre or post-event imagery that you're going to practice, but all can be considered. Okay, when we want to develop our training program, our imagery training program, and there's a model we can use. It's called the PETLET model. Now, we want to use this model because it just helps us develop that script and develop the image that we want. It helps us develop the vividness, the perspective that you're going to take, and things that you're going to want to control in there. So the components of PETLEP, and it's just PETTLEP, it's physical, environment, task, timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. Now, with each of these, we want to be able to understand when developing an imagery script on how to, what we're going to write out or what we're going to put into that script. And now, again, the script should be something that you start out as a skeleton, and then as you become a more learned imager, you will then change this up, and we'll see that as part of this PETLEP imagery strategy. Okay, so with the physical aspect of it, basically you want to adopt the correct stance, put on the uniform, or hold the implements in your hand that you're going to be using in the event. So that's part of the physical component of the PETLEP imagery script. Now, the environmental portion of the imagery script will be that you want to mimic the competitive environment. So if it's a sport, you want to have the idea of the vividness of what the event looks like. Are you indoor, outdoor? Is it hardcore? Is it grass? Those kind of elements. So all that needs to be added into your imagery script. The task, you want to image the task exactly like the actual performance. So again, this doesn't have to stick just to sports. You might be wanting to do imagery script for your upcoming tests or upcoming interview or even an upcoming date, right? You might want to do that. So think about the task you have, the timing. Remember to imagine things in real time. Now, there is evidence that imagining things in slower than time can help correct mistakes, but generally speaking, we want to imagine things in real time. And then the learning aspect, as just mentioned, as you begin to learn your script and feel comfortable with it, you could begin to add things in. So when we initiate an imagery script, we want to start with real simple images, real simple vividness, right? Not getting too complex yet. But as we learn, we want to change the imagery and add vividness as our own vividness and use of all five senses improves. Then we always want to add the emotional component, right? Whether it's a job, whether it's sports, whether it's academics, right? There's an emotional component to that. So make sure that in your imagery script, when you're thinking about it, that you add the emotional component. Feel the anxiety, feel the distress, feel the anger or the excitement. You feel your arousal levels change during an event, right? Those are all important components. So that's the emotional component. And finally, the last P in the PETLEP imagery model strategy is to put in your perspective, either internal or external. It depends on your preference. And so that's part of what you will want to do in terms of setting up your imagery script. Okay, so let's recap. Imagery, it's using the mind to enhance your performance. It allows us to develop a blueprint. It allows us to innervate our muscles with new nerves for creating the correct movement patterns and the correct thoughts, the correct emotional response to things. And essentially, you have to do what you would do in any psych skills training program. You have to educate yourself on it, acquire skills, and practice to improve your imaging ability and performance. So that wraps us up for our imagery portion of this module. And I hope that this enlightened you into how imagery can be effective, how you maximize imagery, and just some theories behind how imagery works. So if you have any comments, thoughts, questions, or concerns, please let me know. Have a great day. Go Beach!